The last king on the mountain. He had lost everything. His empire was gone. His lords had turned against him. His people were afraid of him. His army had melted away into the hills. And now the greatest empire on earth was standing at the bottom of his mountain, waiting to take him. Any other man would have run. Any other man would have knelt down and begged for his life. But Tewodros did neither. What he did in his final hour shocked the British Empire itself. It shocked his enemies, and it made sure that more than 150 years later, we would still be telling his story today. It began on a hot afternoon in April. Tewodros stood high up on the mountain, and below him the British army was moving through the valley. And he made a choice. He would not wait to be attacked. He would strike first. He gave the order, and his warriors poured down the mountainside. They came down screaming with spears and shields and old guns, running straight at the enemy. They were brave, unbelievably brave. These were men fighting for their emperor on their own soil against strangers who had come from across the sea. But bravery was not enough that day, because the British soldiers had something the Ethiopians had never faced before. They had new rifles, guns that could be loaded and fired again and again, far faster than anything Tewodros's men carried. And they had rockets that screamed through the air and burst among the charging warriors. It was not really a battle. It was a slaughter. In a single afternoon, hundreds and hundreds of Ethiopian fighters were killed, and more than 1,000 were wounded. And on the British side, 2 men died. 2. That was the difference. Not courage, not heart, machines. The Ethiopians had the braver hearts and the older weapons, and in war, that is a terrible thing to be. And what about the great cannon Sebastopol? The giant gun he had dragged through the mountains for months, cutting roads through solid rock, pouring in his last strength and his last hope? They loaded it, they aimed it, and they fired it for the very first time, and the great cannon cracked. It broke apart. It never fired a single useful shot in its life. Everything he had built, everything he had forced into being by pure will, broke at the exact moment he needed it most. That night, the emperor sat in the dark, and he finally understood. It was over. He could not win. So the next day, he tried to make peace. He set free every one of the prisoners he had been holding, all of them. He sent them safely down the mountain to the British. And then he sent gifts, cattle, a peace offering, the old way, from one ruler to another. But the British general refused his gift, and his answer was short and cold. Surrender. Give yourself completely, and put your fate in our hands. And there it was, the same thing. Always the same thing. All his life he had wanted one thing from the world: respect. He wanted to be treated as a king, not as a bandit, not as a beggar, not as the koso seller's son. And now, at the very end, the world was offering him the one thing he could never take: to be handed over like a prisoner. He would not do it. "I will never be taken alive," he said. And so, on Easter Monday, the British came up the mountain to finish it. They climbed the steep path in long lines up toward the great rock fortress, and Magdala was strong. It sat high above everything, with cliffs falling away on each side and only a narrow way in. In the old days, an army could have sat at the bottom of that mountain for a year and never taken it. But those days were gone. The British brought their guns up and pounded the walls. Rockets flew over the rock, and then the soldiers rushed the gates. They blew the gates open, and they poured inside. There was fighting in the narrow spaces, but there were so few men left to fight. Most of the emperor's soldiers were already dead or already gone. The last handful standing beside him fell or ran or simply laid down their weapons. And then it went quiet. The soldiers moved through the fortress, room by room, hunting for the emperor. They expected him to be waiting with a sword in his hand. They expected one last fight. And when they finally found him, they found that he had already gone. Rather than be captured, Tewodros took his own life. And here is the part of this story that people never forget. The pistol he used to do it with was a gift that had been sent to him years before from Queen Victoria of England. Think about that. The same queen whose silence had broken his heart, the same queen whose letter never came, the same empire he had begged for friendship and then defied. Her gift was in his hand at the end. That is how the story of Emperor Tewodros closed. Not on a throne, not in a palace, but alone on a mountaintop, surrounded by foreign soldiers, at the end of a dream that had eaten him alive. Even the British were stunned. They had come to punish a mad African king, but standing there, looking at what he had done, many of those soldiers wrote afterwards that they felt something they had not expected: respect. They knew they had beaten the man who never once in his whole life agreed to be small. And they were right about that. Because think about what this man had done with his life. He was born with nothing, no royal blood, no army, no name worth anything. He grew up hearing people laugh at his mother in the market. He ran into the bush as a boy with only a spear and an idea. And from absolutely nothing, he pulled a broken country into his hands. He beat the greatest lords of his day. He crowned himself. He tried to build roads and laws and a real army and a nation that the world would have to respect. He failed, and he failed badly, and he hurt many of his own people while he was failing. But he was never small, not for one single day of his life. And now he lay still, up on that mountain, at the end of a dream that had eaten him alive. The war was over. The prisoners were free. The British had what they came for. But they did not leave straight away, because up there in that fortress, behind those broken gates, was something the soldiers had not expected to find. Room after room of treasure, gold, crowns, books, holy things that Ethiopia had been keeping safe for hundreds of years. And in one of those rooms, there was also a little boy, a frightened 7-year-old who had just lost his father. His name was Elemiu, and he was the son of the emperor. The British looked at the treasure, and they looked at the boy, and then they took them both. To be continued in the final part, Part 5. Don't go anywhere, because in Part 5 you're going to find out what really left that mountain and where it all ended up. It took 15 elephants and 200 mules just to carry it away, and the little prince they put on that ship would never, ever see Ethiopia again. This is the part of the story that has not finished yet, because more than 150 years later, Ethiopia is still asking for her treasures back and still asking for her boy to come home.